The History of Don Quixote by Cervantes. Illustrated by Gustave Doré. Don Quixote, Part 1, Chapter 1. The quality and way of living of the renowned Don Quixote de la Mancha. In a certain village in La Mancha, of which I cannot remember the name, there lived not long ago one of those old-fashioned gentlemen who are never without a lance upon a rack, an old target, a lean horse, and a greyhound. Soup more frequently of mutton than of beef, minced meats on most nights, lentils on Fridays, griefs and groans on Saturdays, and a pigeon extraordinary on Sundays, consumed 3/4 of his revenue. The rest was laid out in a doublet of fine cloth, velvet breeches, with slippers of the same for holidays, and a suit of the very best homespun, which he bestowed upon himself for working days. His whole family was a housekeeper, something turned of 40, a niece not 20, and a man that served him in the house and in the field, and could saddle a horse and handle the pruning fork. The master himself was nigh 50 years of age, of a hale and strong complexion, lean-bodied and thin-faced, an early riser and a lover of hunting. Some say his surname was Quixote or Quixote, for authors differ in this particular. However, we may reasonably conjecture he was called Quixote, i.e. lantern jaws, though this concerns us but little, provided we keep strictly to the truth in every point of this history. You must know, then, that when our gentleman had nothing to do, which was almost all of the year round, he passed his time in reading books of knight-errantry, which he did with that application and delight, that at last he in a manner wholly left off his country sports and even the care of his estate. Nay, he grew so strangely besotted with these amusements, that he sold many acres of arable land to purchase books of that kind, by which means he collected as many of them as were to be had. But among them none pleased him like the works of the famous Feliciano de Silva. The clearness of his prose and those intricate expressions with which it is interlaced seemed to him so many pearls of eloquence, especially when he came to read the challenges and the amorous addresses, many of them in this extraordinary style. The reason of your unreasonable usage of my reason does so enfeeble my reason that I have reason to expostulate with your beauty. And this, the sublime heavens, which with your divinity divinely fortify you with the stars, and fix you the deserver of the desert that is deserved by your grandeur. These and such like expressions strangely puzzled the poor gentleman's understanding, while he was breaking his brain to unravel their meaning, which Aristotle himself could never have found, though he should have been raised from the dead for that very purpose. He did not so well like those dreadful wounds which Don Belanus gave and received, for he considered that all the art of surgery could never secure his face and body from being strangely disfigured with scars. However, he highly commended the author for concluding his book with a promise to finish that unfinishable adventure, and many times he had a desire to put pen to paper and faithfully and literally finish it himself, which he certainly had done, and doubtless with good success, had not his thoughts been wholly engrossed in much more important designs. He would often dispute with the curate of the parish, a man of learning, that had taken his degrees at Sigenza, who was the better knight, Palmerin of England or Amadis de Gaul, but Master Nicholas, the barber of the same town, would say that none of them could compare with the Knight of the Sun, and that if anyone came near him, it was certainly Don Galaor, the brother of Amadis de Gaul. For he was a man of most commodious temper, neither was he so finical nor such a puling whining lover as his brother, and as for courage, he was not a jot behind him. In fine, he gave himself up so wholly to the reading of romances, that a nights he would pore on until it was day, and a days he would read on until it was night. And thus, by sleeping little and reading much, the moisture of his brain was exhausted, to that degree that at last he lost the use of his reason. A word of disorderly notions picked out of his books crowded into his imagination, and now his head was full of nothing but enchantments, quarrels, battles, challenges, wounds, complaints, amours, torments, and abundance of stuff and impossibilities, insomuch that all the fables and fantastical tales which he read seemed to him now as true as the most authentic histories. He would say that the Cid Rue Diaz was a very brave knight, but not worthy to stand in competition with the knight of the burning sword, who, with a single backstroke, had cut in sunder two fierce and mighty giants. He liked yet better Bernardo del Carpio, who at Roncesvalles deprived of life the enchanted Orlando, having lifted him from the ground and choked him in the air, as Hercules did Antaeus, the son of the earth. As for the giant Morgante, he also spoke very civil things of him, for though he was one of that monstrous brood who ever were intolerably proud and brutish, he still behaved himself like a civil and well-bred person. But of all men in the world he admired Rinaldo of Montalban, and particularly his sallying out of the castle to rob all he met, and then his carrying away the idol of Mahomet, which was all massy gold, as the history says. But so he hated that traitor Galadon that for the pleasure of kicking him handsomely he would have given up his housekeeper, nay, and his niece into the bargain. Having thus lost his understanding, he unluckily stumbled upon the oddest fancy that ever entered into a madman's brain. For now he thought it convenient and necessary, as well for the increase of his own honor as the service of the public, to turn knight-errant, and roam through the whole world, armed cap a pie, and mounted on his steed in quest of adventures. That, thus imitating those knight-errants of whom he had read, and following their course of life, redressing all manner of grievances, and exposing himself to danger on all occasion, at last, after a happy conclusion of his enterprises, he might purchase everlasting honor and renown. Transported with these agreeable delusions, the poor gentleman already grasped in imagination the imperial sceptre of Trebizond, and hurried away by his mighty expectations, he prepares with all expedition to take the field. The first thing he did was to scour a suit of armor that had belonged to his great-grandfather, and had lain time out of mind carelessly rusting in a corner. But when he had cleaned and repaired it, as well as he could, he perceived there was a material piece wanting, for instead of a complete helmet, there was only a single headpiece. However, his industry supplied that defect, for with some pasteboard he had made a kind of half-beaver or visor, which, being fitted to the headpiece, made it look like an entire helmet. Then, to know whether it were cutlass-proof, he drew his sword and tried its edge upon the pasteboard visor, but with the very first stroke he unluckily did in a moment what he had been a whole week a-doing. He did not like it being broke, and with so much ease, and therefore, to secure it from the like accident, he made it anew, and fenced it with thin plates of iron, which he fixed on the inside of it so artificially that at last he had reason to be satisfied with the solidity of the work. And so, without any farther experiments, he resolved it should pass to all intents and purposes for a full and sufficient helmet. In the next place, he went to view his horse, and though the animal had more blemishes than limbs, being a worse jade than Gonola's qui tantum pellis et ossa fuit, his master thought that neither Alexander's Bucephalus nor the Cid's Babesia could be compared with him. He was 4 days considering what name to give him, for as he argued with himself, there was no reason that a horse bestrid by so famous a knight, and with all so excellent in himself, should not be distinguished by a particular name, and therefore he studied to give him such a one as should demonstrate as well what kind of a horse he had been before his master was a knight-errant as what he was now, thinking it but just, since the owner changed his profession, that the horse should also change his title and be dignified with another, a good big word, such as one should fill the mouth, and seem consonant with the quality and profession of his master. And thus, after many names which he devised, rejected, changed, liked, disliked, and pitched upon again, he concluded to call him Rossignante, a name in his opinion lofty sounding and significant of what he had been before, and also of what he was now. In a word, a horse before or above all the vulgar breed of horses in the world. When he had thus given his horse a name so much to his satisfaction, he thought of choosing one for himself, and having seriously pondered on the matter 8 whole days more, at last he determined to call himself Don Quixote. Once the author of this most authentic history draws this inference that his right name was Quixote and not Quesada, as others obstinately pretend. And observing that the valiant Amadis, not satisfied with the bare appellation of Amadis, added to it the name of his country, that it might grow more famous by his exploits, and so styled himself Amadis de Gaul, so he, like a true lover of his native soil, resolved to call himself Don Quixote de la Mancha, which addition to his thinking denoted very plainly his parentage and country, and consequently would fix a lasting honor on that part of the world. And now, his armor being scoured, his headpiece improved to a helmet, his horse and himself new named, he perceived he wanted nothing but a lady on whom he might bestow the empire of his heart, for he was sensible that a knight errant without a mistress was a tree without either fruit or leaves, and a body without a soul. Should I, he said to himself, by good or ill fortune, chance to encounter some giant, as is common in knight-errantry, and happen to lay him prostrate on the ground, transfixed with my lance, or cleft in two, or, in short, overcome him, and have him at my mercy, would it not be proper to have some lady to whom I may send him a trophy of my valor? Then, when he comes into her presence, throwing himself at her feet, he may thus make his humble submission: Lady, I am the giant Caraculambrio, lord of the land of Malandriania, vanquished in single combat by that never deservedly enough extolled knight-errant Don Quixote de la Mancha, who has commanded me to cast myself most humbly at your feet, that it may please your honor to dispose of me according to your will. Oh, how elevated was the knight with this conceit of this imaginary submission of the giant, especially having withal bethought himself of a person on whom he might confer the title of his mistress, which it is believed happened thus. Near the place where he lived dwelt a good likely country lass, for whom he had formerly had a sort of an inclination, though it is believed she never heard of it, nor regarded it in the least. Her name was Aldonza Lorenzo, and this was she whom he thought he might entitle to the sovereignty of his heart, upon which he studied to find her out a new name, that might have some affinity with her old one, and yet, at the same time, sound somewhat like that of a princess or lady of quality. So, at last, he resolved to call her Dulcinea, with the addition of del Toboso, from the place where she was born, a name, in his opinion, sweet, harmonious, extraordinary, and no less significative than the others which he had devised.